Welcome back to Kleppers Corner, Today in History, the show where one date on the calendar tries to convince you it's normal while quietly hoarding more world-changing events than a Bond villain with a day planner. And today's date, November 20th, isn't just a date. No, November 20th is the historical version of a Costco sampler tray. Wars, revolutions, treaties, weddings, space stations, computer software, and one traffic signal invented because human beings apparently needed help not crashing into each other at intersections. This is the day where tanks debut, mosques are seized, dictators die, Windows tries its awkward phase, and humanity collectively asks, wait, why is everything happening today? So buckle up. Grab your ration coupons, your Mark IV tank manual, maybe your copy of Reversey if you're feeling nostalgic. Because on November 20th, history doesn't just walk. It charges, it invades, it testifies, and occasionally marries a Greek naval officer. Let's begin. Segment 1. The day tanks stole the show. The Battle of Cambrai, 1917. The Battle of Cambrai began on November 20th, 1917, a day when the British Army decided, what if instead of sending men across a field to die, we send big metal boxes across a field to die slightly less? And thus, tanks made their mass combat debut, clanking into history like steel rhinoceroses who took a wrong turn into France. Picture the German defenders that morning, sitting in trenches, drinking whatever counts as coffee in a trench, complaining about the mud, and then, oh look, 400 giant armored monsters suddenly stampeding toward you like someone pressed the spawn button too many times in a strategy game. Even the British were surprised it worked. They gained 6 miles in a single morning, a number so shocking that the bells rang in Britain for the first time since the war began. I imagine London was like, should we celebrate or check if we misread the map? Of course, the tanks broke down, the cavalry got lost, and the next week the Germans stormtroopered their way right back through the lines like they were returning a defective product. But November 20th remains the day warfare changed forever. Also, yes, we learned silent registration, which is basically artillery doing algebra instead of trial and error, proving once and for all that math really can save your life, just not your tank's engine. Segment 2, the island of no good choices, the Battle of Tarawa, 1943. 26 years later, November 20th once again said, let's ruin everyone's day. This time at Tarawa, a Pacific island so small you could lose it under a medium-sized Costco, and yet so heavily fortified, the Japanese commander literally bragged 1,000,000 men couldn't take it in 100 years. Spoiler, the Marines did it in 76 hours, but it was about the worst 76 hours imaginable. Because, thanks to a tide chart reading error, yes, a tide chart, the kind you'd see laminated at a beach gift shop, the invasion happened during a neap tide. That means the landing craft stopped on the reef like the world's saddest traffic jam. The Marines had no choice but to walk toward machine guns through waist-deep water. Imagine being told, charge that beach. Also, you're bringing the ocean with you. The footage of Tarawa shocked America because for the first time, people saw how absolutely brutal the Pacific War was. November 20th didn't just mark a battle. It marked a turning point in amphibious warfare. Also, it was the day the military collectively said, maybe we should bomb things longer before we show up. Great lesson, terrible way to learn it. Segment 3, the paratrooper mistake that broke an empire. Operation Castor, 1953. On November 20th, 1953, France launched Operation Castor by dropping paratroopers into the valley of Dien Bien Phu, a place which, even on a map, screams, absolutely do not invade this. But France did it anyway, hoping to draw the Viet Minh into a conventional battle. This turned out to be like challenging Michael Jordan to a game of horse, but giving him every shot and tying your shoelaces together. The French saw a valley. The Viet Minh saw a bowl perfect for pouring fire into from every angle. Giap looked at the French base and basically said, thank you for building a target that cannot move. And thus began the chain reaction. Dien Bien Phu falls. France leaves Indochina. Vietnam gets divided. The U.S. eventually arrives, and history unfolds in a way that makes November 20th feel like the geopolitical version of flicking the first domino and realizing the line stretches across 3 continents. November 20th, 1945 gave us something humanity desperately needed: accountability with subtitles. The Nuremberg trials opened, marking the first time leaders of a sovereign state were held criminally responsible by an international tribunal. It was the judicial equivalent of the universe saying, "Okay, enough." The charges were new. Crimes against humanity wasn't even a legal phrase before this. And yet, here were the architects of a nightmare being forced to answer for it. The courtroom drama was intense. Western judges arguing with Soviet judges, defendants claiming they were just following orders, and Hermann Göring discovering that even charisma cannot sway a court that has seen your resume. The legacy of November 20th is enormous. Modern international law, genocide tribunals, war crime courts, the ICC, all trace back to the principles established that day. It's the rare moment where bureaucracy and morality actually shook hands. Segment 5. Spain finally leaves the dictatorship stage. The death of Franco, 1975. On November 20th, 1975, Francisco Franco, dictator of Spain, finally died after decades of authoritarian rule. And like many dictators, he did not go quietly. He hung on with enough medical equipment to open his own Radio Shack. But eventually, nature said, "Sir, your fascism subscription has expired." His death opened the way for La Transición, Spain's remarkable and surprisingly peaceful shift to democracy. King Juan Carlos, whom Franco imagined would continue the dictatorship, basically said, "Thanks for the throne, I'm doing the exact opposite," and began dismantling the regime piece by piece. November 20th became a symbolic battlefield. Fascists saluted, Democrats celebrated, and historians sighed heavily, which historians do a lot. Today, Spain's democracy stands as one of Europe's strongest, a legacy that traces directly to the moment Franco finally let go of life and, thankfully, of power. Segment 6. Mexico schedules a revolution. The Plan de San Luis Potosí, 1910. Only in Mexico could a revolution have a scheduled start time. The Plan de San Luis Potosí literally told the country to rise up at 6 p.m. on November 20th, 1910. That is organizational commitment. I can't get people to RSVP for a birthday party, but Madero got a nation to pencil in overthrow dictator into the evening slot. The initial uprising fizzled. Madero crossed the border expecting an army and found a few guys with rifles and maybe a donkey who looked unsure about the whole thing. But the idea caught fire across Mexico. Villa and Orozco rose in the north. Zapata mobilized peasants in the south. Porfirio Diaz, dictator for decades, suddenly realized he had scheduled retirement without knowing it. November 20th became Dia de la Revolución, a national holiday celebrating the start of modern Mexico. It's like the 4th of July, but with more mustaches and better music. Segment 7. The siege that reshaped the Middle East. Mecca, 1979. On November 20th, 1979, armed militants seized the Grand Mosque in Mecca, the holiest site in Islam. They smuggled weapons inside using coffins, because if history teaches us anything, it's that humanity will absolutely weaponize anything. The insurgents declared the arrival of the Mahdi and held thousands of pilgrims hostage, turning the Saudis' most sacred space into a militarized nightmare. The Saudi military struggled. The rules of engagement inside the mosque were a theological minefield. Eventually, French advisors helped strategize, which required some quick conversions, or at least a wink and nod version of conversion that only a government could invent. The aftermath was massive. The Saudis doubled down on conservative religious rule, fueling global Wahhabism and shaping modern extremism. November 20th marks not just a siege, but the beginning of a geopolitical wildfire still burning today. Segment 8. Europe decides timeout. The Second Treaty of Paris, 1815. On November 20th, 1815, Europe signed the Second Treaty of Paris, basically saying, we tried being nice after Waterloo's prequel, but now you've escaped, fought another battle, and frankly, we are done. So the treaty slapped France with indemnities, occupations, and territorial losses, and established the Concert of Europe, a geopolitical group project designed to keep the continent from exploding again. And remarkably, it worked for almost a century. That's incredibly impressive for Europe, which historically treats peace like a limited-time promotional offer. Segment 9. 2 human achievements. 1 orbit, 1 operating system. 1998 and 1985. November 20th is a technological double feature. First, 1998, the Zarya module launches, starting the International Space Station, a Russian-built, American-funded module rising from Kazakhstan to remind humanity that even after the Cold War, we can collaborate on things bigger than ourselves, especially if payroll is involved. Then, 1985, Microsoft releases Windows 1.0, the world's introduction to tiled windows. A design decision made because Apple basically said, overlap your windows and we'll see you in court. So Windows 1.0 looked like a mosaic designed by someone who feared commitment. But it set the stage for Windows 3.0, 95, and everything else that eventually allowed your relatives to ask you for tech support every Thanksgiving. Segment 10, engineering the impossible, the Alaska Highway and the traffic signal. 1942 and 1923. In 1942, November 20th marked the completion ceremony for the Alaska Highway, a 1,700-mile road built through wilderness so unforgiving it once swallowed a bulldozer whole. 10,000 soldiers, nearly 4,000 of them black troops whose contributions were long overlooked, built the road in just 8 months. It transformed the North and remains a marvel of grit and engineering. And in 1923, Garrett Morgan patented a traffic signal with a third position. Before this, traffic signals basically told drivers, go or stop, a system obviously invented before cars could reach speeds higher than a motivated horse. Morgan's warning phase evolved into the modern yellow light, which, depending on where you live, means either slow down or floor it like you're starring in Fast and Furious Civic Edition. Segment 11, children, identity, and culture, global milestones. 1959, 1989, 1999, 1695, 1983, 1947. November 20th is also a social and cultural crossroads. It gave us Universal Children's Day. First, with the 1959 Declaration of the Rights of the Child. Then, the 1989 Convention on the Rights of the Child, which every country except the U.S. has ratified. That's right, even countries who can't agree on what a government is still manage to sign it. It marks Transgender Day of Remembrance, honoring lives lost to transphobic violence. Brazil observes Black Awareness Day, honoring Zumbi dos Palmares and the enduring struggle against racial injustice. ABC aired The Day After in 1983, scaring Reagan enough that he reconsidered how fun nuclear winter would be. And in 1947, Princess Elizabeth married Philip in a wedding so modest she had to use ration coupons, proof that even royalty has had to deal with the DMV-level humility of paperwork. Segment 12, modern turmoil and modern spectacle, Bamako and Qatar, 2015 and 2022. November 20th in the 21st century continues its tradition of being exhausting. In 2015, militants attacked the Radisson Blu in Bamako, Mali, taking hostages and leaving a nation shaken. It was a stark reminder of the instability creeping across the Sahel. In 2022, Qatar opened the first World Cup in the Arab world. It was equal parts celebration, soft power flex, and international argument starter. The stadiums were dazzling, the controversies louder. The soccer, well, that depends on who you ask. But November 20th once again landed squarely in the middle of global headlines. In conclusion, November 20th is not a date so much as it is a historical gravitational well, pulling in revolutions, trials, invasions, dictatorships, treaties, space stations, operating systems, holidays, attacks, and weddings. It's the day tanks rewrote warfare, the day Spain rewrote its government, the day Mexico rewrote its political future, and the day the world rewrote the rules of justice. It's a reminder that history doesn't distribute importance evenly. Some days get more than their fair share of plot twists. So the next time your calendar flips to November 20th, take a moment to appreciate that you're standing on one of the busiest intersections in human history, one that needed Garrett Morgan's traffic signal centuries before he ever invented it.